Winston County Courthouse singing. We're so happy that you all came. I'm so happy you all came. Particularly, this is a great opportunity to sing in a historic space. We did this once before when we had a lesson about the 1936 edition of the book. I don't think we had quite as many singers that day, so I'm really looking forward to hearing more of the beautiful sounds that you all will make. Let me get my notes out here. So, we just sang 36 on the bottom, which I believe, so I'm not 100% sure, is the first song they sang at the 7-day celebration of the Centennial of the Sacred Harp and the dedication of the Denson Monument that you saw outside. The reason I'm not 100% sure is that whoever's taking the minutes did not write bottom or top on any of the songs. 36 on the bottom seems a lot more likely to be the opening song of a singing like this than 36 on the top. So I'm going to go with that. We're going to have a few more of those that we'll sing today that I did a little bit of guesswork on which was the top and the bottom. But I think most of the time at least we'll be right, if not all the time. So this is a wonderful environment that we're in for singing. And I think a lot of us, maybe when we first come to camp here at Camp McDowell, don't even realize that basically this was kind of the center of the Sacred Harp universe for a good many years. A whole bunch of members of the Denson family lived within just a few miles of here. O.A. parents lived in the neighborhood in this county. And the Godsey family, Palmer Godsey wrote the song on page 490 in our book. Several other very prominent singers lived right in this area. And there were singings around here like you would not believe. There were 1,300 people that attended this event that we're sort of commemorating today in 1944. Now you got to remember, this town only had about 500 people living in it at that time. So the population of this town more than doubled when they had this week-long singing here. There were people here from Life magazine taking pictures and writing a story on it. There were people from as far away as Texas and all over Alabama. If you look, I know, I think we might have run out of copies, but those of you that do have the minutes, can look at this later. Where's the line about it? That is my name on it. But anyway, in the minutes you'll see in the back all the names of people that registered and that were entered into the list who attended over the course of those 7 days. And I think it's over 1,300 names. That's where I came up with that number. God only knows how many people maybe just kind of wandered in and out and didn't register. So there were a lot of people here for this event. And this kind of was a twofold event that was primarily orchestrated by George Pullen Jackson, who in fact had his first Sacred Harp singing experience here in Winston County, in the little community of Pelican, which he describes. Here we go. Basically describes it as being no town, but just a little unpainted church off behind and sort of in the woods off of a crossroads. And he'd gotten word that there was going to be a singing here. He'd written to I believe Joe James. This is in 1926. And we received word that this would be a good singing to come to. So he got in his car. Well, first he got on a train, took a train to Coleman from Nashville, because that was the nearest rail point. And then he got in the car and he drove 2 hours, and what he describes on sandy roads, over branches, things could barely even be called streams, through pinewood forest, until he got to this little crossroads and found mules and wagons tied up as far as the eye could see. People were using some of their wagons for picnic tables to put the food on, to put dinner on, and came into the church, and they were having a really good singing on a 4th of July, 1926. So from that moment on, George Pullen Jackson was hooked. And of course, I think most of the people in this room have some idea of the great contribution that he made. He was sort of the original Sacred Harp scholar. Joe James took a crack at it, but Dr. Jackson actually had more credentials. So he came and he wrote this article called the Fasola Folk, which in any case, it was the first academic article written about sacred harp singing. So he's describing what he encounters. He's kind of guessing at the origins of some of these things, because there's really no precedent for understanding where some of these traditions come from. He thinks all the music is from British Isles, basically, which in a lot of ways, a lot of it sort of originally is. A lot of the melodies come from England and Scotland particularly. But he's just full of enthusiasm, brimming with enthusiasm, trying to figure things out. And that's in 1926. And then he keeps coming back here. Of course, he goes to numerous other places to sing. But again, the Densons all lived at one time or another in this county. Sebring Denson, Tom Denson, Hayne Denson, Ruth Denson Edwards, Annie Denson Aaron, Ole Denson, Whit Denson, both the brothers and their children, and some of their children's children lived here for decades to come at various points. Like some of them kind of moved in and out of the county. So there was a time, in our minutes, we see that in 1944 there were in fact at least 13 singings in this county. There probably were a lot more. This is just the ones that were under the aegis of the Bear Creek Convention. You can see that on the back page that we do have these minutes. And I will print out more. I think we're going to have this. So now we're down to about 5, I think is the number I figured out. There are, 3 sessions at Shady Grove, I think, that happened over the course of the year, one of which is the Winston County Convention. There are 2 other singings at a church called Shady Grove here in Winston County. There are a lot of Shady Groves. This is the Winston County one. There are 2, one called the Wakefield and another called the Clifford Wakefield memorial singings that take place at King's Schoolhouse. One's in November, the other is in June. And that's what we've got left. And from what I've heard, just the little I've heard, none of those are particularly big singings at this point, are they?
I think the Shady Grove singings are very.
Yeah. So, what about us? Camp Fasola has come to Winston County. This is a great thing. And hopefully, maybe having more singings like this, having more connections with the community here, maybe we can get some people interested in Fasola again. I know that as I've traveled around to different locations in this county, and the few times that I've been able to do that, everyone we run into, because be it a gas station or at the post office or groundskeepers at the cemetery when we went to Fairview the first time, to visit the Denson graves. Everyone knows what Fasola is who lives around here. They might not know how to do it, but they remember doing it as a kid or going to sing as a kid. Their grandparents did it, their aunt did it. They remember when it used to be at the courthouse, whatever the story is. So there still are memories in the popular consciousness in this area of sort of the heyday of Sacred Heart singing that went on here. Just a little bit about Winston County, too. Winston County is actually a really interesting place, not just for Sacred Harp singing. In fact, it's more widely known in the world as being the Free State of Winston in the Civil War, because this was an area that was populated mainly by poor white farmers who didn't have slaves. And they resented the people with the money who didn't have slaves and didn't feel like they wanted to go and fight for that for the Confederacy. So a lot of them officially, they adopted a resolution to remain neutral. So they didn't want to be bothered. They didn't want to have conscription, which was the law at the time in the Confederate States for men of age to serve. They didn't want to have that here. They didn't want to send people to the Union Army. They just wanted to be left alone. The powers that be weren't going to allow that. So finally, there was a whole regiment in the Union Army that was begun out of men who lived in this county. And in fact, there were people that were partisans for both sides, but the records we have seem to indicate that the majority actually favored the Union here. So when they were having a meeting about this, there was the chief delegate who was sent to the secession convention in 1861 who voted against secession, and he convened a meeting at a place called Looney Tavern. Looney Tavern. They had a couple meetings there. And there was another person there who was a partisan for the Confederate side, and they were arguing about this and whether what they should do in terms of sending men to either side or what their official position should be. And so the fellow whose name is drawing a blank on here, who was the delegate, now I can't remember his name, he said, well, if Alabama has the right to secede from the Union, then why don't we as a county have a right to secede for the state? And then his opponent said, oh, well, that's great. Hurrah for the Free State of Winston. And that's how that nickname came about. And if you look outside, just across the street from the courthouse here, you'll see the statue, and it's called the Dual Destiny statue. And it's sort of to illustrate that. The man in uniform is sort of wearing sort of a worn, tattered uniform. And if you look closely, you can see that it's half Confederate and half Union. There were a lot of struggles that happened just in this area at that time, and this is kind of in the time when this area was really sparsely populated. The courthouse was made of logs. There weren't that many people here. There weren't that many people of European descent who had even settled here for very long. But there was all kinds of strife because the Confederate Home Guard, as it did in other places, sometimes took out personal vengeances on people because they could. And there was a lot of violence. People were killed, and it even went on after the war was over. So that's the backdrop wherein Sacred Harp starts to take hold after the war. And the earliest convention that we have knowledge of that was founded here is the Cedar Creek. Is that right? There it is. I'm sorry, the one that was founded in 1874.
Is it the Rock Creek Mountain?
There it is, Clear Creek Mountain Home is first. That's 1874. And then Rock Creek Mountain Home is in the 1890s. It's the two that I was getting confused. So the Rock Creek Mountain Home Convention continued annually actually until 2007. The Bear Creek Convention continued until 2009. So these are recent deaths in the family of conventions that we have that are lamentable. These conventions were around for a long time. So it would be really great to get some stuff going here in this area again. This area matters so much to the history of Sacred Heart. Let's see what I've got here. So, some of the other locations, I'll just read off some of the other locations where there were singings. Some of these I found in old newspaper clippings from the early 20th century that are not in the 1944 minute that we have. Some of them have fun names. Old Enon, Antioch, Pine, Tucky, New Hope, Fairview, where we'll be journeying in just in a little while, where various members of the Denson family are buried. Double Springs, right here at the courthouse. King Schoolhouse, where they still have singings. Barrett School, Rock Creek, Haleyville Courthouse, 2 courthouses in one county where they have singing. Macedonia and Mount Zion. A couple of the other places were Old Flatwoods, Smith's Schoolhouse, and Pear's Chapel. These all sound like such wonderful places. I want to go find them. How many of them are still there? I bet some of them are, and I bet if somebody took some time, could spend maybe a week here, or a few days at least, you could find some of these. I hope to do that myself sometime. With all that stuff going on, though, there's one singular event that brings singing alive more in this county than any other event. That is the arrival in 1895, or thereabouts, of Tom and Seaver Denson and their families. The Densons come here to live on the farm around the Helican area, that area that George Owen Jackson was talking about earlier as being no town, not even a place, but just sort of a crossroads with this dusty old church by it. That's where they came to live. And when they came here, Tom and Sebring were already the most famous singing school teachers of their age. They had traveled all over in Georgia and Alabama by that time and taught who knows how many singing schools. If you go to Sebring's grave, which we won't be doing today, but it's not too far in here. It's in a little community called Nesmith, Pisgah Church, Old Pisgah Church, I think it's called. On his headstone, on the back of it, it says, "Taught more singing schools than anyone else who ever lived or worked for that." So they were very active. They were very talented. The whole families were talented. Their wives, who were also sisters, the Burdettes, were very talented singers by all accounts. Certainly their kids were. You think of Payne Denson. You think of Ruth Denson Edwards. You think of Maggie Denson Cagle, who apparently had a beautiful voice and had a wide range. These were Tom's children, Howard Denson as well. And then Sebring's children, who were Whit Denson and yes, he's the one who died. And Bob's the one I'm trying to think of, who lived until the 1980s and was famous for being one of the best treble singers of his age. So there are, I think, about 15 or so Sacred Heart writers that lived in this county, including all these members of the Denson family, Palmer Godsey, O.A. Paris, H.A. Paris, and a couple of others who all lived here and were active here writing music. So there's all this heritage here. Then we get to 1944, and that's what we're really going to be thinking about celebrating for the rest of the time we're here and when we're singing. And what we're going to do to help celebrate that is I've kind of gone through these minutes and I've kind of made the Reader's Digest version, or the greatest hits as best I could, sort of to form a little narrative of some of the stuff that went on. Because we don't have a whole week to reenact. We don't even have a whole bit. So we're going to sing about a dozen songs or so that are selections. And the next song we will sing was sung on the Monday, the first day that they sang here, by Annie Denson Aaron. Annie Denson Aaron was a daughter of T.J. Denson. She married Newt Aaron, who was for more than a dozen years, I believe, the sheriff of this town. Probably had a lot of activity in this building. And then was a deputy after that. Jules going to tell us a little story about that later on. And she led 155. So let's sing 155. Who would like to lead 155? Be Annie Denson here. Any volunteer?
Susan, you can be Sharon this time.
Me?
Take one.
Yeah.
I never have.
Oh, I thought that was.
No,
Sorry.
but it's a good idea. I'll learn.
It's going to be great.
Oh, now? Okay. Well, here we go.
You have the floor.
Yeah, and I have to learn the pitch now too, or something like that, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. That was very nicely read.
Thank you.
So, in our minutes here, we can see right on the first page here, our officers were Lonnie P. Odom, he was the president from St. Joseph, Tennessee. Howard Denson, again, one of the sons of T.J. Denson, was the first vice president. Andrew Shaddix was a very prominent singer from a very prominent singing family from this area. There's a photo of him in here, right on the next page. You can turn over and look at. When you look at the roll call in the back of the name, you will see got to be at least a dozen Shaddixes in that group who came to the singing that week. He was the second vice president. J.B. Weaver, who was a judge here, might have sat in this very courtroom, I would expect that he had, was the treasurer. Ruth Denson Edwards, as she so often was the secretary. And Mrs. A.B. Burdick was the registrar. That's it. Let me start with a registrar. Welcome. Great. Do you know anything about her? Great. There's a whole list of people here, the chaplains, the program committee, the finance committee, the hospitality committee, the refreshment committee, the building custodian, who they thank very specifically in their final resolutions for doing all the work. Because you remember, there were 1,300 people in a town. There were, that only had 500 people most of the time. This was a lot of work to put this on. This was a big deal. And in fact, in a lot of ways, it was probably the biggest singing event that happened, certainly around here. If not, it's a whole week. So, let's sing on page 426 on the bottom. Jasper. Jasper is in Walker County, not too far away from here. This song was led on the next day, on Tuesday, September the 19th, by Vera Denson Nunn, who was a daughter of T.J. Denson by his third wife, one of the younger generation. And she led a song written by her dad. So, who would like to lead Jasper, 426? So, that sounded really good. Enjoy it. We've got a nice hot little after dinner session going on here. Excellent. I didn't get to talk earlier because right after the first song, of course, on that Monday, opened up these proceedings, was led by the president, Lonnie P. Odom. Lonnie P. Odom was an interesting character. Lonnie P. Odom was a financial backer for a lot of Sacred Heart endeavors around this time, and particularly around this area, even though he lived up in Tennessee, but not too far away. He was a financial backer of the 1936 edition of the book. He was noted in the minutes here for providing prize money for the contest that they had that we're going to get to in a minute, leading contests and singing contests. There are some other stories about Lonnie P. Odom that I'm not going to go into right now. But here's an indication maybe about something about the personality of this gentleman. Maybe, I'm not saying for sure, I didn't know. Guess how many songs Mr. Odom led on the first day of this singing? Somebody take a guess.
0.
20. I like that. You're going in the right direction. That's a little high.
16.
10. 10. Just on the first day. He opened up the singing with 4 or 5 songs. He did most, if not all, of his own callbacks. Each one of those had multiple songs. It ended up being 10 songs over the course of the day. Guess how many he led over this, the whole week, the 7 days?
40.
Right you are. Count. 40 songs.
With
So
1,300 people here?
that's an average of, about 6 songs a day, a little more than that, 6.5 songs a day, whatever you want to say. So I don't know. There weren't that many leaders. Now you remember there were 1,300 people here, there were maybe 30, 40 leaders. I didn't go through and count them all. That's about what it is. Most of them were names you might even recognize. Members of the Denson family, Marcus Cagle, Wayne Harris, people like that. Also members of some of these other local singing families like the Shaddixes, who led lessons. Many of them were multiple song lessons. Some of them were only one. Usually they might be 2 or 3. I think Payne has one lesson that he does. That is 4 or 5. But yeah, 40 songs, that's a lot. Even for the chairman of the convention, I have to say. I'm just going to leave it at that. Let's take a look at the next song. Greatest hits of the Centennial celebration. Let's sing 142. We're going to talk just a little bit. I might ask Buell actually to say something a little bit about J.D. Wall.
I don't know much specifically that I can do. Obviously, he's known as a great singer here and teacher of music.
Yeah.
D. Wall.
Yeah, D. Wall. And that's how there's a photo of him in your minutes, and they actually put.
J.D. Wall is buried at that church liberty at Helican where they have the 4th of July.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Mark that on our calendar. Came a visit. We're up to Wednesday now, and if you look in your minutes, you'll see that they had contests. And there were 2 sets of contests, one for groups of adults, classes of adults from different locations, 3 different locations, and then individual children, leaders. So what's interesting is there were these 3 classes. J.D. Wall led the group from Helican and won the first prize. And what do you think the first prize was?
$10.
Nope. Better.
Get to sing more songs.
Probably, but no. That's not
$60.
30 songbooks. Because, LP Odom's giving out prizes, so come on. That's pretty cool, though. 30 songbooks, I'll take that,
That's a
You
whole
can
community of singers.
supply a whole community, you can sell them, whatever. Remember, this is, not too far out of the Depression. It was during World War II. So, they got 30. The second prize winner was the Jasper class led by Lee Wells. They got 25 books. The third place winner was the Double Springs class led by Levi Godsey of that very prominent family of singers, the Godseys, we mentioned earlier. So only 3 people in it, so everybody won. Everybody won something anyway. 20, I mean, hey, I'll take that third prize, 20 new Sacred Heart songbooks, that's all right. So anyway, the class from Helicon, led by J.D. Wall, sang 142. Who would like to be 142? Come on, it's 142. There you go. Sort of a live room. We want to do honor to our predecessors, this hallowed space, and try and watch the leader and pay attention. Which I know it's a little hard to sing here. Just get used to it best you can, but pay attention. Okay. So yeah, that was the adult contest. This was held right about 1:30 in the afternoon. Then about just a little while after that, they had the kids' lesson. And I think there were 16 entrants. Kids contest, I should say. And there were 18 contestants. And there was a tie for the winner. The winners were Lucy Marie Ryan. Lucy Marie Ryan Highland, who we'll be meeting later on today. And she was tied with Naomi Dreyer. And again, there's photos of them in the minutes. You can look at your minutes and see these 2 lovely young ladies who were tied. It's been so much fun to be tied. And each got $5, which $5 is a lot of money when you're, it's actually a lot of money now when you're 10 years old. So a lot of money back then. Yeah.
What did the contest consist of? What were they competing in?
They were, the kids were competing in leading songs. So the minutes actually specify what the criteria were for judging. It was tone, it was form, it was balance of the class, and things like that, which you can look at. The judges were Uncle Will Laminat, Morgan D. Lewis, and Harvey C. Bass. I don't know anything about him. So they were the judges for the adults and kids contest. What a lot of fun that must have been, especially for the kids. You know, the other contestants, the ones who didn't win, were each given $2. So you got $2 just for entering. That's not bad. I'll take that. The children were trained by J.D. Wall, who we spoke about, and Elmer Kitchens. So they were coached by these 2 prominent singers. Never heard anything bad about Elmer Kitchens. Just that he was a sweet man, but he was also a very talented man. It must have been really great to have him as a teacher. So, let's sing on page 436, the song that Lucy led 71 years ago. You can get her to lead us back. Who would like to sing 436? 436, come on. Help me out here.
Aldo, are you doing any rule ones later?
No, we're not doing
Sing
it.
this one.
That's for your pleasure.
Can you please sing it?
Sure. Naomi, who was the tie, the person who tied with Lucy, led page 405. Good for information, we won't sing that now. Let's move on to Thursday, which is zipping right through this week. Still got plenty more to come, though. On Thursday, Andrew Shaddix, member of that very prominent Shaddix family that I mentioned earlier, who, I don't remember how many of them were in the roll call there. He led on page 274 at the top, we're going to assume, based on other songs that were around that time. Maybe guess that's what it was. He was the vice president of the 1944 celebration. He was the president of the Winston County Convention at that time. And the Winston County Convention actually allowed itself to be absorbed by this celebration. So the last 3 days, I believe, of this are actually technically part of the Winston County Convention. So it was like a group effort, or sort of like two scenes merged into one. Do you know much about it, Jack? Couldn't find it either. Okay. Who would like to sing 274 at the top?
I will.
Why don't you get up and lead us together?
Safety numbers.
batch of Densons here to close out our greatest hits of 1944 celebration singing. Looking here, I see that old Denson, author of 477 that we looked at in the keying class yesterday, one of our favorite songs to key. He was here. He was living in Cleveland, Tennessee at the time, although he actually did live in this county for a good chunk of his life. He sang on page 432, 298, and 176. We don't know whether it was top or bottom, but either one would have been good. T.B. McGraw was here. And he sang on page 345, page 227, and page 304. Mrs. Ida Denson McCoy of Arley, just up the road, who was a daughter of Seaburn, led page 434, then page 196, and then page 360. Just to mix it up a little bit, which is a wonderful song. That's one of my favorite songs. Let's see, Marcus Cagle was here. There were a number of prominent singers here who were not going to be able to cover in terms of singing the songs they sang, but it really was, I can't even imagine what the sound must have been like with such a great class. All the stars of Sacred Heart, or most of them, were here, and plus just the untold masses of people and the sound that it must have created. I'm surprised this building's still standing after all. So, let's see what we've got here. So we're going to sing on page 277 next. Who might like to lead that? This gentleman over here. Soul to the man from Yorkshire. This was led by Howard Denson. Guess how many times Howard Denson led this song over the course of this song? Two. Twice. Why not? 2 different days. Great song. Howard Denson can do whatever he wants. So we'll only sing it once. But yeah. That song deserves to be sung more than once and sing sometimes. Howard Denson, of course, was the son of T.J. Denson and brother of Payne Denson, one of the founders of the Sacred Heart Publishing Company. Wrote some beautiful music. Wrote a song on page 373 in our book. Wrote some gospel tunes. And sadly died at the age of 52, I believe, from throat cancer. Is that right? His daughter, some of you may remember, was Amanda Denson Brady. Was a very active singer even after she couldn't sing anymore, which is the only time I got to know her. But she was such a powerful presence. We would always sing her when Nathan was still living up closer to me. We would always see her at the Potomac River Convention. She would come to the Shenandoah Valley, run Shenandoah Valley singing course, the first few years that I started coming down to this part of the country to sing, I always remember seeing her at the Chattahoochee. And she was always such a great presence. When she couldn't speak anymore, she had throat surgery. She had a little pad of paper that she would carry around. And she would just write you these notes, and she would always tell you when she liked your song. She would write you a note and say, I loved your, 4:30 or whatever it was. And she would, when I knew her, she would always get up and sing page 376, which on the one hand was so sad, on the other hand was so beautiful because she could stand in the midst of it and still derive and enjoy the energy, even though that she couldn't actually sing herself anymore.
Aldo, you should look on the publishing company newsletter website right now. We have a nice little recollection from Jonathan about her, but also a picture of her posing right out front of this building in about probably 20 years ago.
Yes, with Dr. Warren Steele.
That's right.
Yes. Which rolled up. Yes. We're going to sing page 392 next. As I think most of us know at this point, it is not named after the industrial city, not so far from where these folks live, over on the other side of the pond. But in fact, the teeming metropolis, the great mecca of activity that is Manchester, Alabama. Which Dave has visited yesterday. Yes. Would you like to
Yeah.
something? That's such a great song. Payne Denson is, to me, just pretty much at the top of the list of singing poets. It's hard to choose a favorite song. We often hear the adage of my favorite song is the one we just sang or the one we're singing right now. But another question that I posed to some of my friends who were interested in writing music or even just other singers at the time who were sort of talking about this was, if there was a song that you could have written that's in the current edition of our book that could have had your name on it, that you could have created, what would that be? And for me, that's much easier to pinpoint. That is on page 532, written by Payne Denson. We had a session about Payne here a few years ago, and maybe we'll get to repeat it sometime. He was a really interesting figure, a pivotal figure in 20th century sacred harp history. An enormously talented guy, personality as big as the man himself, and he was a pretty big man. And lots of great stories from people that remember him, particularly Mike Hinton and Francis Rawl, who's a descendant of Denson as well. So we'll segue that very neatly, or maybe not so neatly, right into the next lesson, which of course was led by Payne Denson. Of course, now we're into Friday. We're getting into the weekend crowd showing up here. We're actually officially part of the Winston County Convention now. And on Friday, Payne Denson sang on page 176. Now, which song do you guess he might have read? Top of all. Yes, it was, and I'll tell you what the other songs were. Here we go. Hang on. Hank Denson of Birmingham, Alabama led songs on page 346, which we talked a little bit about last night in regards to Beef and McGraw, followed by page 386, followed by 143, interesting change of pace, followed by 176, and then 329. So there's a McGraw song. That was kind of harder for me to tell whether it was 176 top or bottom. I'm going to say top. Yeah. So who would like to leave 176 at the top? Denson selections. Marcus Cagle led on page 151, page 391, and then page 240. That must have been an interesting one. So, and when you look through your minutes, you're going to see things like that sprinkled all over the place. Again, these luminaries, these great figures of 20th century Sacred Harp, all singing together, many with multi-song lessons, many making really interesting and challenging choices that I'm guessing the class was more than able to meet. I really wish I could have been there. I really wish there was at least a recording of it. Let's move on. Here we are on Saturday, and it's time to sing on page 145, and I'll pose the question again. I'll read to you from the minutes here. Address by Dr. George Pullen Jackson, entitled More About Sacred Harp Music. More. Still yet more. Remember, he'd already written several books and articles by this time. At the conclusion of his very interesting lecture, Dr. Jackson sang on page 145, 209, and 38. Hard to tell which of those songs it is. I'm going to go for 145 at the top. I guess that might be it. Who would like to lead 145 at the top?
I'm hoping you'd say
Incidentally, on Saturday, Mr. Cagle led on page 198, followed by page 232, one of my favorites, and then on page 310. Interesting. I like it. Mixing it up a little bit. So, let's move on to Sunday. Now remember, there are a number of people here who were here all 7 days. There are some people that just came at the beginning of the week, some people came just for the weekend, but most of the members of the Denson family were here the whole time. And some of the other local folks were as well. So imagine, it's kind of like going to camp, except probably even more singing than we do after a week of camp and the weekend singings that we go to before and after camp. So Sunday, we have entries in the minutes of some special events. Of course, the sort of main event, sort of extra special event, comes at the end of the day on Sunday. We'll get to that in a minute. But before the monument outside was dedicated, there's an entry in the minutes here that says, the secretary read greetings from H.N. McGraw of Freeman, Georgia, B.J. Bahanan of Lufkin, Texas, A.D. Jolly of Dallas, Texas, Mrs. Lola Denson Gibbs of Logan, Alabama, Auntie Crawford of Beckville, Texas, and the Secretary Interstate Sacred Heart Association. Never heard of that?
No, Wilson.
Where's that?
Interstate, this is middle Wilson.
Oh, okay.
West forward.
Cool. So if you, when you have a chance, if you want to look through your minutes, you can see that these letters actually were all printed and included here. There are also some other ones that aren't even mentioned. I guess they came later, after the convention was over. And some people couldn't come because of illness, just because of the distance. Remember, there were war rations on fuel for cars at that time. So if you had to drive a long way, you might not be able to make it on the ration that you were given for that week. So that was entered into the minutes at that time. Then, let's see what we got here. Oh yes, there were special guests who were recognized. The secretary, Mrs. Ruth Denson Edwards, then formally introduced two distinguished guests. Mrs. Edith Ford of Atlanta, Georgia, a reporter for Life magazine, and Mrs. Marie Hansen of New York City, a photographer for Life magazine. These charming ladies attended the convention Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, getting data and pictures for Life magazine. As a token of appreciation of their interest and efforts in behalf of Sacred Heart music, in quotation marks, President L.P. Odom presented each a copy of the original Sacred Harp, autographed by hundreds of Sacred Harp singers. Where are these books now? This is like the Sacred Harp equivalent of a baseball autograph by the 1927 New York Yankees. You put that on eBay, I'll bid $1,000 on it straight away, if that ever comes up. So yeah, that's really interesting. I wish I knew more about what happened there. The minutes, sometimes they giveth, sometimes they taketh away in terms of the information that we have. So, yes.
Do you have a copy of that Life magazine?
I do not. I don't know what became of it, to be honest. Yeah, so that's something.
From George Paul Jackson's correspondence, it looks like the story was ultimately trumped by News about World War II and never ran.
Never ran.
And Jackson continued to pursue the possibility into the early 50s and almost until he died. Never was run. Photographs around.
Photographs, yes. So, we've come to the end of a long day of singing almost. And what these folks did is probably not too different than what we're shortly about to do, which is to go outside and meet the monument out there. only this was the unveiling of the monument. It's 2 p.m. on Sunday afternoon, September 24, 1944. And they had a whole separate program just for this event that they printed in this minute book. And there was a devotional by Elmer Kitchens. There was yet another George Cole Jackson address, this being the primary one. There's a photograph of him standing next to the monument delivering this address. It was entitled, "The Denson Brothers and Their Contributions to Sacred Park Music." There were songs written by Densons and then sung by Densons. I wish I could have heard that. The unveiling of the memorial and other formalities associated with the memorial. There is something listed as number 8 on the list that just says, "Song by everybody." Okay, I like that. And then the Reverend George Montgomery closed with prayer. There was, in the minutes it says, there were some songs after that. They came back in and sang yet more. The convention was reassembled by Elmer Kitchens, singing on page 111, 113, and 176 again. A lot of traction out of that 176 number. And then the way that it's listed in the minutes when the convention came to a close is, "This brought us to the closing hour. Questions of thanks and appreciation were extended to all who contributed to the success of the occasion. The great body of singers and listeners joined in singing on page 62, the parting hymn, and mid smiles and tears, they bade each other a loving farewell. Some to meet again soon, to sing again these songs of Zion, some to meet in that land where there shall be no sad parting, where we'll sing forever a song to Moses and the Lamb, with our loved ones who are watching and waiting for us." I think I know who wrote that. Yeah. The secretary. That's just Ruth Denson Edwards. That's just so much her style. It's such an elegant way of closing minutes. She was a great writer. Anyone who's read the preface in the front of the book that she wrote can see that in the 1991 edition. There's one other little story I'd like to have my friend Dr. Cobb here share before we will sing on page 62. This involves something that happened after the singing.
Well, this is a story that I tell in the book that was told me by Philip Denson Aaron, who was grandson of Newt and Annie Denson Aaron. And at some night during the convention, because of the travel restrictions and the fact that people were unable to drive back and forth in many cases, Newt and Annie Aaron invited a number of singers to stay at their big house on the hill outside of town. And that group included, as I said, notables from the singing world, including McGraws and Kegels. And at some point, Newt Aaron came in. At that point, he was chief deputy, having previously served as sheriff here. And he came back to find, as I put it in the book, liquor and its evidence, and its effects broadly in evidence at his home. This Winston County was famously dry, and he was, to say the least, not amused. And so he called Ruth out to the porch to speak with him. She was there with her sister Mag, staying as well. And he called her out to the porch. He selected her, called her out, and he said, "Roosh," her name originally was Jerusha, and called Roosh by the family. And he said, "Roosh, I'm going back to town," to his office there. "And when I get," he said, "I'll be gone about 45 minutes. And when I get back, if everybody's not asleep and all this mess cleaned up, I'll find them a place to sleep uptown." By which it was understood he meant the jail.
Right over there. Yeah, just the next building.
Now, if you were looking for somebody experienced in crowd control, how could you do better than the ultimate schoolmarm, Ruth Denson Edwards? She was somebody who knew how to make her will plain. to the folks. And so the story goes that when he came back later, everybody was snoring.
I love that story. And it's great. I was reading along with what you were saying, and I was quite familiar with what you wrote. So thank you for sharing that with us. We're going to sing on page 62 and close out our greatest hits of the 1944 celebration, and then I'll turn it over to Buell as some more things to share with us before we go outside. So let's sing on page 62. And close us with a prayer if you would. Fa la fa, fa la su fa la, la su la su la su la su su la su fa fa, fa la su fa la, la su la su la su la su su la su fa fa.